Janine Strong, and you're listening to Keeping It Real with Janine, your guide to living an authentic, healthy life podcast. Dr. Michael Smith is with us again to talk about the existential crisis of our children. My previous conversations with Michael have been extremely informative, with a good dose of humor. So I'm quite sure today's conversation will also be interesting and enjoyable. Dr. Smith applies a combination of functional medicine and evolutionary nutrition with the wisdom and experience of traditional Chinese medicine to his healing practice. This combination of traditions helps him understand and respond to some of today's most complex health challenges in a very comprehensive and effective way. Dr. Smith calls himself the autoimmune health detective. Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking time to come on the podcast again.
Hello, Janine. It's great to be back. I'm looking forward to another fun and informative conversation.
Me too. Well, I really enjoyed our last conversation on neuroplasticity. And I believe it was after our conversation, we got into a chat about today's kids and all the screen time and you know, what's happening with kids today. And I thought, well, since the lockdown and the uncertainty of the future, it's kind of exacerbated our kids' challenges. And I thought now would be a really good time to have this conversation.
It sure is.
So how did you, I know you've done a lot of research on this, and how did you become interested in really digging down into this?
I would say the first real impulse was being a parent and
Mm-hmm.
trying to make educated, informed decisions about, I guess, just how to raise your child in the 21st century. So that's I think the biggest inspiration for me is to make sure over the last 20 years since my son was born that we're on top of the best possible decisions and choices and environments and behaviors, because we're all kind of making this up as we go. It's a new
Mm-hmm.
world, it's a new century, it's a new millennia. So I think as parents or as teachers, that we all hopefully are taking a really thorough sense of responsibility for the experiment of the modern world, and screens are a massive part of that transition for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big part of how we educate people. It's our fundamental form of entertainment, and nowadays, and I mean this with a bit of humor, but also I guess with a bit of warning, it's become kind of the nanny babysitter. I'm busy right now, I'll be back in 15 minutes after I make supper. Quick solve for parents or teachers or other people working with children. So there's pluses and minuses to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we're all willing, I guess, to be patient enough to figure this out together, to be more informed, to be more curious. I don't know everything or that much at all, really, in the sense of some echoing sense of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hoping that, maybe in the next decade, on many levels, our culture is going to come to at least a clear sense of what balance would look like and what long-term health would look like, because we're all in a way lab rats, and we're also in a way the scientists, doing the experiment. So it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be an interesting thing to unravel, and I think the more informed we are about the possibilities and the dangers, the better that experiment will go.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely. And I've talked to so many parents who everybody is concerned about the amount of screen time their kids are on, and how difficult it is to get them off and just to get them doing something. I don't know how many times, like, I have two stepkids that are teenagers, and they'll put maybe like a bagel in the toaster oven or something, and they run back upstairs to the computer, you know, and then the bagel.
See, they're getting exercise. They're running
Yeah,
downstairs. It's
right.
all
Yeah, yeah. And then
good.
like 2 hours later, they remember their bagel. It's like all hardened. Oh God, I wouldn't even eat it that way. But it's like they can't tear themselves away. The addictive properties of especially the gaming, it seems to be, that's hard to drop. And I don't know. I mean, I can do something on the computer and I can go do something else and come back, and even if I'm watching something on Netflix, I can stop it and go do something else and come back. But they don't seem to have that ability that I can
So,
see.
well, can I shift what that's about a little bit?
Sure.
So I'm in my 50s. I think
Hmm.
you're a bit older than I am.
Hmm.
How fast is time going by for you,
Pretty fast.
right? And I'm just throwing this out there
Okay.
because our subjective experience of time speeds up because of how much our life has already been experienced compared to the volume of experience we just thought about. Like, wow, the last week just flew right by. And it's like, well, if you're in your 50s, a week is, one very small percentage of your entire existence. If you're
True.
a child, and someone says, "Oh, that was a long or a really fast week," and the kid's going, "Are you kidding, man? It felt like 20 years."
Interesting. Okay.
Because kids' subjective experience of a 1 week was actually, a pretty big part of, relatively speaking, the volume of my conscious existence as a person.
Hmm.
So if we were to look at that and go, that's an actual measurable thing. The amount of time you subjectively relate to your life depends on how long you've been alive and how fast it seems, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's like kind of like weighing something out. So how many years of your life have you spent really engaged with the internet?
Oh, not that many.
It came out, I think, in 92. It became kind of a thing around 94, 95, where people started to really like engage with email. And I think it was 2009 that social media really took over. So,
Hmm.
for all of us, the maximum possibility is about 25 years.
Hmm. Hmm. And for those of us who are older, it's not. I mean, it seems like for the younger generation, it's a huge percentage
Well,
of
it's been
their
there their
life.
entire life, and that's
Mhm.
my point is
Mhm.
as people who are older, we have no right to have an opinion about how people relate to something that's ubiquitous to their existence, and we keep telling them that it's wrong or bad or that they're doing it wrong or bad.
Mhm.
That's like saying you're using your drinking water wrong. You've been using your toilet wrong, right? Because it's just a part of their environment, right? Because for us, it's this new thing that we're still negotiating with and can have a range of responses and feelings about. For everybody else, it's another room in your house that's always been there, and it's probably the most interesting one, especially if you're trying to solve a problem.
Mhm.
Or you're curious, or you're bored, or you're lonely, or you're not getting your needs met because your parents are drunk, or they're working, or they're depressed and can't really pay attention to you or whatever. So that
Mhm.
room in the house is the biggest room in their life.
That's now this is I'm this is an interesting perspective because I hadn't thought of this. So
Yeah. Because I
I'm
want to
really
start the conversation just quickly, sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
I have no right to be having this conversation. I have no right to tell people under 30 years old how to figure this out.
Mm.
What I would love to be able to do is educate everybody 30 years old and younger and 30 years old and older what's actually going on from a clinical, scientific, physiological, neurological perspective, so that we can all meet where it matters. Because
Awesome.
I have no right to tell people who've lived an entirely different existence. I grew up in the
Mm.
bush without electricity.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
no radio, no TV, no cities, no traffic lights.
Mhm.
So for me, moving to a city was like moving to an alien world,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
So I'm just saying I'm very personally aware of the difference between what we expect our lives to look like based on our experience, and how hard it is to adapt to change.
Mhm. And I think you just made a good point. Expectations.
Yeah. So, I mean, expectations are a really big phenomena in relationship. So, again, as you said, you could project your expectation of your children, your stepchildren's relationship with screens and the internet based on your experience. But if that's allowed to be, then it should be allowed that they can project onto you their expectation that you get it. And for them, getting it is that the internet is sort of like God now, and you're kind of like in between the person who you're talking to, and the actual truth, the actual source of information, the actual source of pleasure and fun. So we can't get it because we didn't live it the same way children today have.
Mhm. True. True.
So that's my quick caveat is I don't have a right to really be saying this to people in the sense of giving any parent a sense of authority to tell your children how to think about this, because we need to collaborate with people who look at the world through a different lens and
Mm-hmm.
find the best possible way, sometimes without words, to engage in our relationships with people that's got to do with their lives more than our expectations of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I stand corrected. I can tell I'm going to learn a lot here because this has been very difficult for me. And
It's every decade over 30 is a decade or is another layer of uh, disorientation to communicating with people who live as a participant with the internet, collective reality.
mm-hmm.
So I think that's the first thing I would encourage anyone is, what's your age, and take a step back and accept, if you can, that your age determines your perspective on this
Mm-hmm.
and your experience with this, and all experience is fundamentally equal.
Interesting. No wonder it's so much harder for me than it is for my husband
Yeah.
because he's a lot younger.
And I mean, I personally know people that are 10 years older than me that are like Jedi black belts with their phone and the internet because they've decided to dive into it and have it all figured out. I'm, I don't know, I'm literally this week trying to get an online scheduling app to work on my website for my clinic. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it really depends on how much each of us invests in this. But
Mm-hmm.
children, 20, 30, anything significantly under 30, their relationship with this is that's how you solve problems. It's not a problem to solve. People
Mm.
my age, the internet's a problem to solve.
Right.
For a lot of younger people, the internet's how you solve problems.
Interesting. Hmm. Okay.
Right. So again, as parents with children, especially teenage children, older children, well, I think we just need to recognize our experience and their experience are equal. And if we're going to collaborate with them, we have to find a way to do it with respect to their experience. When we're talking about children, say under 12,
Mm-hmm.
we have a very different relationship because everybody around a child under 12 is in a way loco parentis, or responsible for kind of how good or bad things go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think as parents, caregivers, teachers, preschool places, day school places, or daycare places, babysitters, whatever, we really need to kind of make an agreement, as to what's going on fundamentally and what the best choices are for our kids, and to find ways to make that sensible
Mm-hmm.
and something that actually can be explained to them in a way that they can go, oh, okay, well, I understand that.
So what is going on?
Where would you like to start? That's a textbook or two of possibilities.
I'll let you choose because you're the one with the information, and I'll help to clarify or ask questions or make comments. But I'm really fascinated because I haven't studied this too much. I mean, I have some like on the effects that the screen time has on your brain and different things, but I haven't really delved in it too much. And I'm really curious as to what you found.
So I'll start that by saying there's two different kinds of screen time.
Okay.
One is proactive.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, I need to find the phone number for something, or COVID-19 pandemic has made me a homeschooling kid, even if I didn't want to be.
Hmm.
So there's a period of time every day I have to be in front of a screen to, push buttons to get through school.
Hmm.
So that's proactive or problem solving, or the focus is on, I guess, a sequence of things that are meant to solve something in the future, or keep things moving in the right direction.
Hmm. Okay.
And most of us as adults, as older we get, the proportion of our relationship with screens and the internet is proactive because we
Right.
just want to look something up and move on.
And get off, right?
Right. Well, for some people, it's like, ooh, ick. Other people, it was like, well, that was fun. And how did I end up with 27 tabs open on my, interaction with the computer? Because I wanted to figure out how to make Turkish coffee, and somehow I ended up with Turkish hash, and now I'm looking at the, prison behavior of Russia. So, so we all know what scrolling and sort of, fiddling around on the internet looks like, and that's sort of in the middle ground.
Hmm.
But then there's this other thing called reactive screen time.
Okay.
where my environment, my present situation, my internal present situations, so that's three different elements of the same moment, are not comfortable, or they feel dangerous, or
Mm-hmm.
I feel socially harmed in some way, or left out, or that I don't belong, or I don't fit in, or I haven't been fed and I'm hungry and I need to soothe myself, or for the last 5 days, because my parents are fighting over their divorce, I've been sort of shuffled off into my room by myself, staring at someone's, screen of whatever kind. Could be a phone or a tablet, or whatever it would be. The adaptive experience is, I'd rather be doing this than anything else because everything else is bad
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or is not conducive to my sense of well-being or my sense of enjoyment or my sense of comfort. And I mean, that's a lot of range there.
Mm-hmm.
But reactive screen time is what's called a compensatory behavior. You're doing it to not have a different experience instead of solve a problem so you can have another experience. Right?
Right.
Proactive is, I need to look up the phone number of my hairdresser because I can finally go and get a haircut again. Woo!
Yay!
I forgot their number. It's been so long. Right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and a therapist said that a lot of the being on the computer so much is, what did she say? It's a way to handle the anxiety.
Yeah. So I mean, we all have anxiety as humans, and nowadays we have reasons to be, even more kind of, I guess, wound up or freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the thing is to make a distinction as individuals. Is your screen time mostly proactive or mostly reactive? And
Mm-hmm.
there's no judge in the world who's gonna shame anyone for this. This is a chance to be honest about how we manage our existence in a way. So as parents or as individuals, that's our relationship with our use. As parents or individuals who care for children in some way, our job is, I think, at first to make a distinction between the proactive use of a utility like the internet and the reactive use of something that has multiple layers of an adaptive hold on your brain and your central nervous system and some very deep primitive aspects of human connection and other needs that we'll get into, that is no different than a person hiding in the laundry room drinking vodka that they have hidden behind the basket of sheets.
Mm-hmm.
It's a compensatory, avoiding a negative with something that is biochemically and physiologically soothing. But I question the benefit of any kind of compensatory reactive behavior because it's the same mechanism as all harmful addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How does it become addictive? Eh,
Well, addiction is about pain.
Right.
So
Right.
we can all talk about melatonin and dopamine and other biochemical factors that have some, I guess, feed in the pond of addiction or addictive compensatory behavior. But to understand addiction, you have to understand what non-mechanical pain is about.
Okay. Okay. So non-mechanical. So mechanical, you're talking like physical pain. You
Yeah, like, oh my God,
twisted
you
your
have a
ankle
broken
or.
foot, or you got
Mm-hmm.
a pair of scissors stuck in your forearm for some reason. So, ow. Whereas, and I'm here's like an environmental metaphor. Here's a child, boy or girl. Here's a parent, boy or girl. Single parent, single child. Single parent maybe has some form of what we might call existential pain, and they're self-soothing with the internet. The child's learning to self-soothe with the internet. The child has instinctual needs to be met, which I'll get into in a sec, and the parent is saying, can you just go to your room and give me 15 minutes because I just need to be with me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that child is being basically modeled into the addictive behavior of using a screen to soothe yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think first step is, as again, people who are wanting to make better decisions, is we have to make sure we're clear that we're modeling the, I guess, answer or solution we want for our kids before we even bring up the subject, because they're learning from us subconsciously and consciously on levels that we should all be more aware of, and I'm going to speak to that in a moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, before we do get into that, what is your definition of existential?
Well, that's going to come up in about 4 minutes, if that's
Okay.
okay.
Yep. Fine.
Cool. Just, yeah, there's sort of a way to roll this out because
Great.
it has to do with how we understand the brain a bit.
Okay.
So let's say that all human beings are actually living three different experiential lives.
Hmm. Okay.
So as a Qigong teacher, we often talk to people about our three Dantian, or they're kind of like chakras. There are three different sort of places within ourselves that hopefully we can cultivate a kind of adaptive advantage or spiritual credibility or whatever you want to think about
Okay.
that makes us feel like we're kind of progressing in a way, right? So that's just to
Mm-hmm.
give people a mental image,
Mm-hmm.
because one way we experience our lives, and I'm not going to go back to the Taoist Qigong thing, it's just kind of a mental image for people, has to do with your instinctual needs as an animal.
Okay.
So I mean, we can all think like food, rest, physical safety, environmental safety, like shelter and heat and things like that. That covers, I mean, an obvious raw aspect of instinctual behavior. The physical safety also includes a lack of physical threat. So
Right. Mm-hmm.
parenting style matters around how children instinctually experience the world and grow into it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So when you're thinking about how your childhood went in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of trauma, or if you're thinking about what a child's experience is like as they grow up in your care, or maybe it's your cousin's kid or something, I encourage everyone I speak to about this stuff to begin with, okay, let's just look at the life of that person's life or your child's life, and how are they adapting to the world instinctually, and how are you supporting that, and or consciously or unconsciously thwarting that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a tricky thing,
Yeah.
and it'll make more sense in a bit, but the experience you have instinctually, say your parenting style is to throw shoes at your kid's head when you don't like what they're doing. Bad example, but
Mm-hmm.
obvious. So when a person has a shoe thrown at their head,
Mm-hmm.
the nervous system that can actually make you duck
Mm-hmm.
is an experience that you actually have about 2/10 of a second before the part of your brain that has language.
Okay.
So that's maybe seem like an abstract thing, but think of that as I don't know. Think of that like a horse,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a part of you that's an instinctual animal, like a horse,
Mm-hmm.
and the horse knows how to duck from shoes really, really well because it's an instinctual animal.
Okay.
But the part of you that has opinions, that has self-reflection, that has self-regulation, that wants to negotiate and calibrate with the people around you, and again, the metaphor we're unfortunately using is a parent throwing a shoe at their kid's head.
Mm-hmm.
That child is now instinctually in an environment of threat and potential harm. So now they're a horse, and on the instinctual level, that's very skittish and likely to kick at things or chew on the hay more or to scratch away at themselves in some way nervously to deal with the fact they're in a kind of existential instinctual pain because they're living in an environment that the universe has told them is supposed to be the safest place in the world, and it's full of shoes flying,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
right? So if we go up a few inches to kind of around your solar plexus, and that's a physiological, neurological center of your body, which
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back to,
Okay.
that's where you intuitively, and I don't mean that in a woo-woo sense, it's actually a scientific structure of human communication called neuroception.
Okay.
So we all communicate very subtly through body language and tone of voice and facial expression
Mm-hmm.
through this neuroceptive kind of communication. Throw shoes at someone's head because you can be a passive aggressive manipulative communicator to your child in some way that makes them know that they're not going to get their needs met right now because of the way you're communicating to them. So now on a social, intuitive, visceral level of existence, you're in an environment that's potentially harmful when it's supposed to be the safest place on earth.
Mm-hmm.
That information is sitting on the horse that's already skittish.
Okay.
That experience and information happens inside your brain 1/10 of a second before the part of you that has language.
Interesting.
So for the part of you that's actually the existential part of you, the part of you that you might call your upper chakra or your brain, the part with language, I often use the term binoculars, the part of our mind that we use to solve problems by being predictive and projecting into the future, the part that we need language and math to solve problems for.
Mm-hmm.
That those binoculars are basically in the hands of a human being called a cowboy or cowgirl sitting on a horse, and the horse is freaking out, and the
Mm.
cow person is freaking out.
Hmm.
So what do you think they're doing with their binoculars?
Looking out for uh,
And it's a
something
child.
negative.
They're trying to look at something that gives them a sense that there is a safe place in the
Ah,
universe,
okay.
or
Okay.
to have the experience that they're in a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can go online at 3 years old and watch birds flop around and maybe try and steer them through an obstacle course or whatever it is that interface screen games for really young kids would be,
Mm-hmm.
that's a predictive experience. I know I pick it up, I turn it on, the weird music plays, I do a certain thing, and I can predict the outcome, which is I'm self-soothing and I'm feeling successful or confident because I got to the next level, I got a prize, or whatever the mechanism is of
Mm-hmm.
the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really important distinction to make, because the question was, what is existential pain?
Mm-hmm.
It's a combination of the how wound up your instinctual body is based on the volume of trauma you experience in that environment
Mm.
to your safety.
Would you say that again, please?
So existential pain is a combination of your instinctual pain,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your lack of safety, your concern around harm to get instinctual needs met,
Okay.
plus your visceral neuroceptive social pain at knowing that you and your parent don't get along clearly because they're telling you to go screw off right now because they'd rather look at the screen themselves alone.
Mm-hmm.
So the solve to the world seems to be look at screens alone. So you go to your room and operate on that habit, or that deference from your parent or caregiver, and now you're doing the thing you needed to do, which is feel safe, feel collaborative, feel connective, feel like you're in progress of some kind. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
existential pain, which is the source of all addiction, and I mean I
Mm-hmm.
work with trauma and addiction in my practice a bit. The problem is it's helping people go back to figure out where the pain came from so that they can work with that. Because the alcohol, the misuse of cannabis, the misuse of pharmaceuticals, the misuse of whatever is to soothe that pain the same way a 3-year-old stuck in the room by themselves is scrolling through a screen, because they have fundamental, we all have fundamental needs to solve problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And chronic 3-part pain is the biggest problem we all face in the modern world, because we're living so far away from what we used to for the last 10,000 years, and then the last say 200,000 years. So as human beings that have been pretty much the same animal, if you will, for 200,000 years, we're 20 years into an experiment where our reactive compensatory response is screens. Adults,
Mm-hmm.
children, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter.
Mm-hmm.
So until we can, as a society, come up with a much better way to understand this and to balance it out, we're basically becoming a society of addicts,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes, I would agree.
And the reason I brought up all that stuff about the instinctual part, the intuitive part, or social part, and the more existential part is that's where the solutions lie.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because we
Okay.
all know, I think, that if you give any person, especially a child, a bunch of screens to deal with, as for adults, it might be our job, but it's also maybe our entertainment. Sitting is the new smoking, and now it's a full-time job.
So, have you, in your travels and working with people in your research, does have you found that all of this addictive screen time does, as people travel, get older and travel through life, are they do they kind of stick with that addiction, or does it translate into alcohol, drugs, gambling, whatever?
That I think that's my fundamental point, Janine, is we have a bunch of children in our society that are living in environments that are modeling addictive behavior, so they don't
Mhm.
have any other choice to predict. I mean, that's what the mind does, is it
Ah,
predicts outcomes.
right.
So the only predictive choice is how to use screens to control your experience. And
Mhm.
if that doesn't work, or there's more, you get numb to it. So let's say you're 25 years old, you're finished university and now you have a full-time job and you're an engineer and you're drafting things all day on AutoCAD, which is a drafting program,
Mm-hmm.
and your screen time is no longer your playtime.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go home and you try and play your video game, but you're not really getting the same dopamine kind of fun from it because you just spent all day solving, instinctual level and visceral level problems for your job
Mm-hmm.
on a screen. Maybe a screen plus an upper or a downer would be the way to go,
Got it.
right? Maybe
Yeah.
a few furious masturbation sessions at a screen to get back to your video game with that little shift of dopamine is the new normal. Or it's the masturbation plus a bottle of vodka and sort of a bit of an upper to balance that out so you can focus more on your game,
Hmm.
right? Because we're trying to control our state and our mind's need to reach into the world to effect something in a way that means something to us.
Mm-hmm. So if it becomes less meaningful, I would think that would create kind of a depression.
Yeah, and that's again more existential pain. I can't even
Mm-hmm.
solve how to feel comfortable in my own home anymore because my modeling tells me it's going to happen through screens or alcohol or something outside of me. So I better start reaching, or better start, altering my physiology and chemistry in some way because, again, that's our society's model is, oh, if you don't feel well, you take a pill.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to feel better, you drink a bottle. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to do this, you do that. And, I'm not just slamming our culture. I'm just trying to lay it out for us as adults again,
Mm-hmm.
trying to find a way to collaborate with a completely different society, which is people under 20, or 20, probably under 25,
Mm-hmm.
who, for them, screens are how you solve problems, so they can't be problems.
Wow, interesting. That's something that I have to wrap my mind around because it's totally different from the way I've been
Yeah,
looking at it. That's
because you and I have no right to be having this conversation
Mhm.
outside of, sharing our best possible understanding and opportunities to change this, which is where the conversation's going.
Right.
But I'm just trying to help people kind of take a step back and, it's like, this isn't, age doesn't make you somehow an authority on something. It may, it's possible, but it's not an automatic thing.
Right. Right.
And the world has become very lateral. I mean, religion doesn't really make the same kind of sense to people in the modern world because you can look at all the other 3,000 religions who have exactly the same ratio of worldview, which is I have a story that tells me the answer and you're wrong, although there's 3,000 other versions of the same effort by humans to control their environment through belief.
Mhm.
So as religion is a diminishing thing in civilization, in modern civilization, because it doesn't solve any problem for anybody right now in the way
Mm.
that it used to,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Although it brings families together and churches together if you're allowed to gather in some way. But
Right.
I'm just saying that most people's response to the world now is very lateral. It's very on the planet. And right now the planet is connected through the internet.
Right.
So we have to find a way to use that utility as skillfully and as caringly as we can, and as wisely as we can with what we know. But we can't just make it good or bad.
Mhm. Mhm. I understand what you're saying.
And that's why I bring up the context of proactive use and reactive use, because it gives all of us a beginning to have a conversation with children over 8. Under 8 years old, there's a whole bunch of things the brain can't do.
Okay.
So trying to use abstract thinking and symbolism and metaphor before a kid is, 9, 10, 11 years old is just confounding and creates anxiety in kids because, you know, they assume that they're a kid and they assume that you know how to talk to a kid. So if you're using some abstract metaphor to a 5-year-old, they're just in pain going, oh my god, there's something wrong with me. I don't know why this adult uh, you know interaction with me is so uncomfortable, because you would assume a adult would know how to talk to a 5-year-old.
Mhm. Mhm. Although, is there a manual for that? I mean, I think
Growing up in a large enough family that you get it, like, and that's another thing is, I really wish there was some magic word that we could all say. It's like playing tag or something. Okay, reset, we're all going to start a brand new game. And the rules are kind of being determined as we play the game, because for the last 20 years or so, society has changed so dramatically and so profoundly that children growing up in it are growing up in as close to a different world as we can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Right.
again, those of us who are trying to figure out how to do this well, the first thing is we have to realize we have to join their world to make sense to them.
Mm.
Doesn't mean we have to spend more time on screens. We just have to change our opinions about it because your opinions are irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It
Right.
sounds kind of like what you're saying is instead of trying to drag them into our world, we need to join them in their world in some way.
Well, we need to sit beside them long enough to actually have them trust us enough again, to trust themselves enough again, that they don't need self-soothing to get through an afternoon alone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because that's again this thing about addiction and existential pain is until you can trust you have capacities within yourself to handle that pain, you're going to soothe it.
Right.
So it's about bringing the context about proactive and reactive use up, and then finding ways to make the distinction clear, and then make the reactive choices more experimental and experiential and collaborative. Because you don't, as parents, we've gotten into this weird managerial relationship with our kids. We manage their upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
in a way, and we really need, I think, to spend more time with them. Now, I'm not trying to get too far afield here, but I have a First Nations background and
Mm-hmm.
work with elders sometimes. And there was an elder I used to work with 30 years ago, and she had said that you only need one word to raise children well.
Okay.
What do you think that word is?
Love.
Yeah, that's like an instinctual state. So it's a word too, but I mean that it doesn't change anything. We all love our kids. So the word that she said was with.
With. Mm-hmm.
So when my son was born, it was about with, because that was the only advice that I felt that I had any use for. So, and as an example, it came to time to teach him to tie his shoes. We went shoe shopping
Mm-hmm.
so we could try on a lot of different shoes,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could sit there beside each other, with each other, learning to tie shoelaces together with each other.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Right? Because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
people naturally learn through modeling, right?
Right.
So if we do things with people, there's that. I think you and I had this conversation a year or two ago on a podcast. Sorry, have a freaky memory. Um,
Lucky you.
where- yeah, um, which I just gapped on for a moment. But it was just another example of how to do things with your kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh no, it was this, I remember. So okay, so here's another example of with that
Okay.
has to do with screens, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a really powerful one because say a certain number of my patients are single mothers,
Okay.
and we all live in the Kootenays. So let's just take a step back and admit that we all have a predictable perspective about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
At least some of us are. And the conversation we were having, you and I were having, was about kids and video games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my response was, well, if you're a single mom and your kid is self-soothing with a video game, you should learn to play that game with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell that to all of my patients because it's the most effective way to stop the winning, losing context of trying to raise your kids, because you're just there on a couch shooting bad guys or trying to solve puzzles or whatever the game is about with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have an opinion about the game, at least the opinion is about an experience, not just about playing video games.
Well, that would help because from my perspective, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, and again, some of us have to realize we have no right to have opinions about things because we don't have any experience of them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So that's what I mean by the manager part of
Right.
parenting.
But what I mean is for me, it's a waste of time. So if I could look at it differently as a way to spend time with,
Yeah,
that makes it more acceptable for me.
yeah, and again, the word acceptable is a very managerial perspective about how to raise children.
Well, at my age, it's kind of, I'm definitely more managerial.
Yeah, and again, and I'm not trying to shame anybody or poke fun at you, Janine. No, we're friends. I'm just saying, like, we have to step back and recognize we're running with a program that doesn't work.
Hmm.
It's causing existential pain in people. We're creating a society of addicts, right? How many people are on pharmaceuticals to just feel better,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I'm really passionate about this because the solution is so simple. Make it your family's culture to do animal things together, like sports, like physical play,
Hmm.
right? Make it a thing that you it's where we're just a family who we cycle or ski or we climb or we hike or we swim or we do martial arts or we do something that doesn't have some weird add-on to it in the sense of like a spiritual practice like yoga. If you want to do stretches, it's about stretchy. It's not about anything else because
Hmm.
kids don't know how to handle anything else. There's three parts to people. If you can have an animal body instinctual way to participate with your kids, inside, outside, upside down, wherever, anywhere, that becomes a part of their modeling. They
Hmm.
may have a preference about, but I want to watch a show or I want to do this. It's like, yeah, yeah, well, you can do that when we come home.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying no, I'm saying yes and,
Yes, yes, I hear you.
or yes when, because of a yes with.
Hmm. Well, I know in my family, we used to once or twice a week we'd play dominoes after dinner.
So
And
that's not really an instinctually dynamic thing, but it's a great example of the second part, which is the intuitive, visceral, social, instinctual body,
hmm.
because
Hmm.
that's the biggest harm that happens with screens. And I can get into the science of that in a sec, but
Hmm.
sitting at the dinner table, actually having meals together every night
Hmm.
without screens.
Hmm.
As our family, it's our culture to actually have this necessary dynamic conversational experience. But if you're a parent and you're like, yeah, let's sit down and eat, I'm just gonna catch up on my emails while you guys talk. Okay, great modeling there, dude.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's something that again, from a manager point of view, as a parent, we create an emotional split between us and the need for connection because we're not seeking connection, we're seeking outcome because we're managing something like an expectation,
Hmm.
right? So until we're down here on the ground, picking things up off the floor with each other and actually engage with each other, we're not with our kids, we're at our kids, we're
Got
talking
it.
at them, right?
Hmm. Mm.
So I just want to bring up a little bit of a science thing because I don't want to make this a 3-hour podcast so people can kind of look something up and get into this.
Okay.
There's a part of us that, in my experience, is the biggest source of existential pain. And it's the biggest source of addiction because addiction is about pain. So for those of you who are kind of turned on by this and really want to like dig in and do the best you can for yourself and your family, we need to all learn about your polyvagal nervous system,
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? And that part of your nervous system is the balance between the fight or flight instinctual animal 200,000-year-old programs that are running in your nervous system that you cannot change unless you spend a decade training every day, right? So
Hmm.
so so that's
Hmm.
going on in your nervous system. But there's a forward facing part of that survival nervous system that reaches through your diaphragm up into your face. It's part of your polyvagal nervous system and your solar plexus that actually, on one level, produce your facial expressions. They produce your tone of voice, how sarcastic or how meaningful you're speaking right now,
Mm.
how easy you are to humor or easy you are to anger,
Hmm.
the way you use facial expressions, eye contact, all of that, because humans read that stuff in a way that's bigger than what you say. And last time I did that research, it was a long time ago. So it was between 61 and 65% of all the information passed between two people having a conversation was information passed through body language, facial expression, tone of voice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right now, you and I are recording a podcast, and I'm looking at my floor talking into a headset. So I mean, I can hear your beautiful laugh and things like that. So I can, on an instinctual level, feel like there's an openness to the conversation because you had a giggle.
Hmm.
But if I got really serious and started swearing a lot and, making statements about, how wrong people your age are and blah, 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 the conversation would feel a lot different, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? Not just because of what I'm saying, but because of how I'm saying it.
Right. Right.
So this is the biggest wound of screens. So if you take a kid, a child who's spent their entire life being soothed by screens,
Mm-hmm.
they can sometimes be misdiagnosed superficially as being autistic
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they don't read body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice like most of their peers do. And that's diminishing every year.
Interesting.
So when we as adults, and I've had this conversation with my son, I've had this conversation with countless parents and children in my clinic at the same time, and we're all trying to figure something out together. When I'm a very physically expressive person.
Mm-hmm.
So I move my hands around, I use my eyebrows, I make goofy faces, I make up voices and characters for people,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of a thing, because that's, I guess, just, maybe how my childhood went or something. But if I'm overtly animistic
Mm-hmm.
with my body language and overly fun with my facial expressions and how big my eyes get or narrow my eyes get and how crazy my voice gets when I'm trying to share a story or a metaphor with someone or have a conversation with my child or someone else, they're actually having a hard time hearing what I'm saying because of the amount of somatic noise, because they're more familiar with two-dimensional faces that just talk.
Oh, interesting.
Or they're used to watching people in two dimensions on TikTok or YouTube or all the other Snapchats, or I honestly have no idea. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. But I'm aware from a physiological, neurological point of view that their polyvagal awareness is blunted. They actually
Mm-hmm.
are offended and feel danger when people are too overtly, I'm not sure what the term is, in the sense of gesture. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're a gesture driven communicator, you're actually terrifying some people because they think you're mad at them,
Oh, interesting.
or that you're actually losing control of yourself because you don't look like all the two-dimensional faces that they have used to solve every problem in an immediate sense their entire life. So your chaos craziness is making them uncomfortable because you could probably just point them to a video to solve the problem and they could watch that and understand what you mean,
Uh-huh.
because that's comfortable for them. That's
Wow.
instinctually their vibe. They grew up on a spaceship or something, in the sense of they're not instinctual cave dwelling animals who hoot and bangs, rocks with sticks when the thunder crashes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're dealing with instinctual things that are changing at an accelerative rate that it says obviously never happened before.
Interesting.
So I'm going to go deeper into that experience. So
Okay.
let's say I'm a kid. I'm 6 or 7 years old. Like any other curious, healthy primate, I want to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
Now, pre-internet, my only access to problem solving was you, Mom.
Mm-hmm.
So now the conditioning, the patterning, the cultural stuff that gets transmitted, the soothing opportunities, the way in which patience works, because you might have to wait until mom goes to the library to get the book, to come home, to find the thing that answers
Mm.
the question, because it was a really cool question and no one knows the answer, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
figure it out together, Billy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a whole different relationship with existentially, like, almost like upper chakra existentially. Humans have the binoculars, the need to be able to predict the world. So if my way
Mm-hmm.
to predict the world and solve problems is, hey, mom, what the hell is astrophysics?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, well, first we need to talk about a solar system, and I need a picture of that, and so now we're collaborating, and they trust you or me or their
Uh-huh.
parent because you're the source of problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
Mm-hmm.
the example of how that happens. Oh, you go to a library and you get a book. Oh, wow, that's good to know. Holy cow, library book. Put that in the hard drive of my brain. Got
Mm-hmm.
to have one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go back to being 5 or 6 years old and you're my mom, if that's okay,
Oh, sure.
role playing. Um, and my entire life has been entertainment, soothing, confirmation bias, connections, social alignments, and everything has happened with something in my hand that's two-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to solve a problem, and I look up and say, "Hey, mom, how do you spell astrophysics?"
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
And you say, well, just a sec, I'll get a pen. I type that into a computer, you no longer matter, mom, because
Mhm.
you're not the be all source all of anything. So when I think of my existential binoculars from an evolutionary adaptive point of view, from a growing up child psychology point of view, my parents are irrelevant managers who just piss me off most of the time.
Mhm.
They might know how to spell
Interesting.
a word, but that's about as useful as you are as how to spell a word.
Mhm.
And where the
Yeah.
hell's my food? And I want to eat this now because I saw a cooking show and it was awesome. So like this is the real world, and what are you doing?
Mhm.
Because the vaster lateral horizontal network of the internet is the world. It is the truth. It is God. It is the answers. It is everything. So our existential crisis for children is parents don't matter. Parents are a pain in the ass. So if we can't trust them and use their modeling, we're in pain because we have no idea how to fit into the world except through a screen, because that's the world.
Wow.
And I mean, for me as a parent, I was very tactical about
Mhm.
screens and television and video games and whatever. My son's a young man. He's just finished his first year of university. You know, we get along pretty well for the most part
Mhm.
as you know, fathers and sons go, given ages and things like that. But when he was young, I mean, we spent more time outside on purpose, learning skills I learned as a kid because I grew up in the bush. I was teaching wilderness survival, so I dragged him along to wilderness survival camps to learn to rub sticks together. And you
Mhm.
know, I'm making this up. At 9 years old, my son and I went into the firewood shed, and we took a piece of an axe and we chopped up a piece of wood and another piece of wood, and we made a fire starting kit. And at 9 years old, he built a fire starting kit and started a fire with sticks. And then put the sticks in the fire, because that's a First Nations kind of ceremony for people who want to learn about fires, is to go into the world, make a fire kit, make a fire, burn the kit as proof that you and fire are kind of allies now.
Mhm.
So I'm
Nice.
just saying that, I mean, that might be like way off the top for somebody in a city, of things to consider doing with your kids. But I'm just using a personal example of we didn't rely on screens for adventures.
Mhm. Right.
Rely on screens for connection. Because his friends had video games and he wanted to try them, I said, okay, we'll get a really 1980s simple, crappy video game to start with. It's like beep, 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 boink, just
Mhm.
to see what happened to his relationship with the game and the screens. And they're not that fun, they're not that complicated. So it was kind of boring quickly compared to what his friends had.
Mhm.
So it was, yes, we'll do that, and it'll be boring.
Mhm.
And then as he got older, he's like, "Come on, Dad, I know better here. We're not buying this crap. If we're gonna get a video game, can get a real one." So we got a bigger, console, and that was the day that me and his mom had that conversation about if we're gonna have a game in the house, then we play it together.
Mhm. Yep.
So I learned how to play video games, and it
Mhm.
was fun, and we laughed and we played and we solved problems together. We learned about spatial awareness together. It wasn't that much difference, honestly, in certain ways neurologically than going hunting for I don't know, animal sign in the forest and remembering how to do that if we were to set up traps.
Mhm.
I grew up 1,000 years ago, so just pretend that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that's one of the frustrating things for me is like everybody's at their screen and doing their own thing. I'm like,
Yeah, I'm just saying that from a neurological point of view. Yeah, but from a neurological point of view, for him and I sitting there on a couch together, taking turns going through a computer-generated maze, trying to remember where all the places are to make the pieces fit together to solve a problem,
mhm.
engages the same part of the brain that requires spatial awareness enough to go and find animal sign and then build traps.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. So I'm just saying video games aren't 100% negative. It depends on what games you play and how you use them and whether or not you're doing it with
With
someone
someone, right. Right.
who can
Yeah.
help you engage in the experience of problem solving instead of the video game being the problem solving of connection.
Mhm.
Go play your game. I'm going to manage this environment and make you craft dinner.
Mhm.
I'm a great parent
Mhm.
because I got my own stuff to deal with because I'm an existential pain too. So, bah, right. And I'm trying not to mock everybody because I mean I've been there myself. So it's at some point we all need to take a few steps back and look at the the attrition to these people's lives who are we used to have the expression of uh, door lock kids or lock key kids or something like that. What is that expression?
Latchkey kids.
Yeah, latchkey
Mhm.
kids, right?
Mhm.
So what's the difference between latchkey kids and video game kids or screen addicted kids?
Mm-hmm.
They're alone kids. They're in pain kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're human animals that require connection to trust the world and trust themselves. If we blunt their polyvagal development to the point where they find normal human mannerisms threatening, well, I mean, I'm not calling that brain damage, but I'm calling that a kind of harm that needs to be recovered.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
the solution is to
Okay.
make sure at the dinner table or playing, what was it, backgammon you guys used to play or
Oh,
something?
dominoes.
Dominoes. So, you have this thing where you're all in it together and you're all playing for the whatever the outcome of the game is, but there's nothing two-dimensional going on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And the outcome is dependent on our ability to collaborate socially, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
get to trust ourselves as children, as social beings who can be more risky, more overt, more shy, more tricky. After 8 years old, kids start lying because that part of the brain pops open. So they're going to play that kind of risky stuff, and they'll get busted, and then they'll get normalized sort of lying and manipulative behavior because they had to get socialized in that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reins on that on a screen.
Right.
You can completely, I don't know, insecure, narcissistic, manipulative person and keep developing those tendencies because you're never dealing with an actual person who's going to call you on it.
Interesting.
So, I mean, that's where the biggest harm is. So, picnics, screen-free
Mm-hmm.
time, screen-free connection-driven participation. And that's why I think stretching on the floor or doing something physical together, you get two, call them chakras with one practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Instead of two birds with one stone, by finding ways to physically interact with your children as social time as well as body time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
What do you do when they don't want, like, I've tried to get them to, like, come outside with me and help me in the garden, but, they'd rather sit in front of their screen.
then you're going to have to play it out as a sequence.
Play what?
Play it out as a sequence.
Mm.
Find a recipe that has this in it that you really want to try and make together tonight for supper.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, okay, I'll go and do that because that gives me a yes and with screens.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you're doing the confirmation bias thing. You could even be sitting beside them looking at the screen together going, what do you want to make? Carrot cake with the carrots? Do you want to make carrot souffle? Do you want to make carrot and dill with, maple syrup? Do you want to, what do you want to make? Let's look at recipes. Oh, okay, great. And you now had a collaborative experience. There's maybe body language and tone of voice and really big smiley facial expressions going on about all the great things you can do with carrots. And great. Do you want to come outside with me and get some carrots and then wash them off so we can make supper?
Mm-hmm.
So now there's a
Got it.
sequence of things of collaboration, and I mean, I feel like I'm being a manipulative bastard in saying what I'm saying, but that's the non-managerial relationship of parents, which is I have to collaborate and connect.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell, I can't expect. I expect my kids to want to do this stuff because I kind of felt like I wanted to do it as a kid. But did you want to do that as a kid, or did you have to?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're trying to project a have to over a what to over a I would rather, and we get all this confusion going on between us and our kids because we expect them to want what we used to have to do that was like a chore.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're like three layers of separation about meaning and the truth of what's going on. So if we step back and go, how can I get this kid into the garden?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not really about the garden, it's about with. So what
Mm-hmm.
else can I do that's a sequence of with that produces an outcome that says yes and to screens and yes and to making supper together?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's learn about the vegetables we have that are coming up right now. Let's look at recipes we can make with those things in them and then go and do it together.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing we're trying to solve isn't no screens. It's how do we collaborate and spend more time in polyvagal connection and meaning together?
Mm-hmm.
Because the manager parent is like, how do I get these kids to leave the screens alone? Well, I mean, the big solve would be an EMP because then there's no electricity.
Right.
So, but then we all don't get to play. So, not really a solve. So, we have to again get out of the manager mind and go,
Mm-hmm.
what can we experience together that it has no use for screens, but begins with screens and ends with screens?
Mm-hmm.
because we could Instagram the meal we made and put it up on the internet together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, wouldn't that be a day, Janine?
Mm.
Let's pick a plant. Let's pick a recipe. Let's go and get it. Let's go and make it. Let's take a picture of it. Let's high five each other, fist bumps and bum shaking dances because it was about doing something together, not about screens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about like just turning the internet off for a few hours or 4 hours or whatever during the day so that
It's a very
everybody.
managerial decision to make.
I know. But it does also kind of force, I mean, I know like we've done it sometimes and then, the kids they go outside and they do stuff and
Yeah, yeah. So Janine, I'm gonna force you to do something, okay?
okay,
You need to do 100 push-ups a day from now on. Why are you laughing?
cuz I can't.
It's not about that. This is black and white. It's on or off.
Mhm.
I'm the authority here, right? I'm the
Mm.
parent. I'm
Yep.
managing you.
Yep.
I made a distinction. It's 4 hours a day, 100
Mhm.
push-ups a day. It's whatever BS you want to throw at people and assume that they're not going to laugh in your face for trying to be a, I don't know, ranch hand and they're the cow.
Mhm.
If you're
Mhm.
not, so if we take a step back and we look at the instinctual human being in the child,
Mhm.
called lower chakra stuff,
Okay.
the intuitive, emotional, polyvagal, social human that's in that child that's experiencing everything you do subconsciously, and then we look at the brain and the existential mind that's predicting and trying to find truth and meaning in the world because that's what humans are doing. If I actually look at that and recognize I'm responsible for the outcome of all of that and the input of all of that,
Mhm.
and the best way I can do that is actually backwards in time,
Okay.
where we're all at the dinner table together. We do fun things, call them chores, but fun things together that
Mhm.
matter, and all
Mhm.
of this other stuff. Then we're actually raising a person to become a person on three levels, consciously or not.
Hmm.
And if we're not attending to those three different aspects of that person when they leave the house, you know, um, they're going to solve that need in hopefully functional ways, but more than likely than not in dysfunctional ways because they've been disoriented to the world because they've been managed,
Hmm.
told what to do.
Mhm.
So, what I'm really speaking to is their authentic autonomy.
Okay.
So, as a child, did you get what you would consider respect and honoring for your authentic autonomy from every adult?
Most of the time.
Really?
Mhm.
You were never punished, you were never bullied, you were never harassed, manipulated, lied to, coerced, convinced.
I was never bullied. No, my parents were pretty straightforward.
Right. So maybe that's why you're who you are in the sense of I think you're pretty cool. So in the sense that you kind of have a lot of things together in yourself.
Mhm.
I'm just asking you to consider the authentic autonomy of children who, one, raise up in environments without a lot of other children.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
used to be 12 kids per family, now it's one or two. So
Right.
their polyvagal, opportunities are very narrow.
Interesting.
Their chance to figure out their autonomy and their place in a group of 10 people or whatever, whatever the number would be, is narrow. And
Mhm.
now we have one or two kids, and our kids are taking time away from each other because two or three kids is done. I don't know. It's like a war, for supremacy, and they're going to all split off and do their own thing. I've
Right.
been talking to a lot of parents who just spent 2.5 months in a house, homeschooling their kids of different ages, stuck dealing with each other, having to spend time together, realizing there's a limit to screens and toilets in the world somehow magically all of a sudden, because
Mhm.
we're all in the same space together.
Right.
And the challenges people are facing, the wins people are creating, the wisdom that people are receiving and generating because we're all stuck in the same place has been powerful and profound because we're all stuck in the same place with each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the game is, are we going to honor each other's authentic autonomy, whatever the age is, whatever the experience, whatever the day is, or are we going to manipulate and manage them?
Mm.
Right?
Mhm.
Kids can't help not manipulate each other in a way, but adults can. right?
That's
So we all
true.
have to slow things way, way down and start making sequences of experiences and behaviors that become the cultures of our family.
Mhm.
Because as much as right now you and I are having a conversation about, whew, at least our kids are older, in the sense of you and I,
Uh-huh.
but we're also having a conversation to try and help a lot of people right now in 2020 post-COVID paranoia and stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, when we can come to that for a couple of minutes might be a good idea
Mhm.
with a completely different perspective. But you and I's conversation is also about those children's children.
Right. Right.
And for me, as a clinician who's trying to help people understand big picture stuff, that's the biggest terrifying, gut wrenching, butterflies chewing on my liver experience that I have is I know how addicted to screens I can be. I know
Mhm.
how addicted to screens people my son's age can be. I know what that looks like in 20 years based on some basic statistics and math, but I don't really know. I'm just predicting to the best of my ability, and it looks terrifying
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and then
because
you've got kids who become adults who've spent their life on screens, and then they're bringing up children,
yeah.
and that's all they know.
And by then, do you think school will just be at home through a screen?
Oh God, that sounds horrible. I
So
mean,
sociologically, it's terrifying, but
yeah.
economically, it's a huge win.
Mm. Mhm. But then you're not getting the socialization and
That's why I said sociologically, it's
yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to like put this whole conversation in perspective is it isn't about how to get through the weekend with your kid, although it is. It's
Mhm.
about recognizing we're responsible for the next generation and we're not taking responsibility for it, we're managing it. So we're having
Mhm.
instead of a proactive relationship with this problem, we're having a reactive relationship with it, which is sneaky as I am, why I started the conversation that way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because you can't solve a reactive problem by reacting to it,
Well, and I'll be honest, that's what I've been doing. So,
right? So let's just drop the bomb of COVID on the conversation.
mhm.
So I'm going to go back to being that 6-year-old. And I grew up the way 6-year-olds grew up today, looking at screens, two-dimensional friends and realities and answers to everything if I can find someone to help me spell astrophysics. And then everything on the screens are about social isolation, about maybe millions of people dying, about,
Mm.
whew, it's mostly the old people who die. I'm a young person. I'm going to probably be okay.
Mhm.
But I'm also 6 years old and have no way to mentally or emotionally or instinctually handle the consequences of what I'm predicting in my head.
Mm. Mhm.
And I look at mom, and mom's shitting her pants. Oops, pardon me. Mom's pooping her pants about all the consequences she sees coming. So now it's more screen to you, Billy, because you're more of a distraction right now from life and death stuff I have to figure out through a screen.
Mhm.
So now the polyvagal setting for that child is this is now a life or death relationship with the screen.
Mhm.
And my parents are useless as parents because they have no idea what they're doing.
Wow.
So now trusting them to solve this completely abstract, very adult problem to a 6-year-old is more reliance, more clutching, more proximity to my screen device. Because, oh my God, you take that away from me, it's me and you versus an apocalypse, and you're an idiot
Wow.
because you're not the person I'm used to seeing to solve problems. You're the person who can spell better,
Mm.
right? So
Mhm.
until we can actually like embody the experience of a 6-year-old and really feel it through and get where they're coming from, we have no right to be having this conversation
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
the sense that we should just figure out the answer and Dr. Smith will know and we'll have the answer and we can manage this. And I'm like, if there's one place in the world that's the really wrong question, it's this conversation for sure.
Mhm.
And I just want to be clear, Gene. I'm not suggesting that's your perspective at all.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to, for everyone who listens to podcasts, to hopefully find a quick answer to something. I challenge you to feel like a 6-year-old with a screen white knuckled in your hands in an environment where there's catastrophic global problems you can't even understand. And the people who you instinctually need to rely on to do this are doing the same thing.
Mhm. Well, and then, I mean, I also see that they're getting then this constant stream of information that's making them even more fearful.
Yeah, and they have the power of spelling, so they can keep digging deeper into, the 17 windows they have on or tabs they have on whatever computer they're on, because humans are like that. We have binoculars. We're always trying to like guide our way through, the terrain that we're in to get to a better place,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's our biggest sort of skill in a way, but it's also our biggest source of pain. Because we don't have the animal instinctual needs met, we don't have the social polyvagal kind of needs met, and trust ourselves and trust the people around us. The only thing we have left is a screen, because it's our binoculars into how to get to a terrain that makes sense to us. So it's a
It's
big,
pretty
crazy trap.
scary.
It is scary. It's physiologically terrifying, neurologically terrifying, the immune system terrifying, dopamine and melatonin terrifying, right? Because we're doing something that has physiological impact as well as sociological impact, as well as immediate managing your kids' impact.
Right. Right.
So it's not turn them off. It's sit down and sit with your kids, start having really meaningful, hopefully physically animate conversations with them so they can learn to get comfortable with body language again,
Mm-hmm.
and try and solve it without telling them how to solve it, because they're probably in 10 years going to have more insight about this than we are.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't have a collaborative relationship with someone you manage. I mean, we can go more into any particular part of the brain you want, or specific aspects of anything else you want to talk about. But I just really wanted to make sure that I could give anyone listening to this a way of seeing ourselves as three selves with three different kinds of needs, and that the part of us that we're the most comfortable with is riding a terrified horse, depending on the amount of trauma you've experienced instinctually.
Mm-hmm.
We're walking around on the shoulders of a primate or a cow person, because I like cow persons, cowboys and girls, because their music is all about how bad social lives can go.
Mm-hmm.
So these are instincts to help us feel that we can instinctually trust ourselves on an animal level and on a social level. And those
Mm-hmm.
things are being broken
Mm-hmm.
in ourselves and in our kids. And there's no one to blame. We just have to shift what it is that we rely on for our health, our well-being, our sense of self-trust, self-awareness, even self-love, so that our response to pain isn't self-soothed through anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because addiction is addiction. It doesn't matter if it's a screen or chanting.
Right.
You
Right.
know, so I think that's my message to every one of my patients is, let's just reset this from managing your diagnosis to learning about how your body works,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and maybe how nutrition works, and maybe how breath work works, and maybe how vitamins work, and or Chinese herbs work, and what acupuncture could do, because they're collaborative experiences. We do
Mm-hmm.
them together.
Right. Right.
That's why the word doctor actually means teacher of common sense.
Mm. Oh, I like that. Teacher of common sense. Hmm. I think we've gotten away from that.
Oh boy. Yeah, you want to see someone managing health, go to a doctor and they'll tell you what pill you need.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then I have to say, I don't think so.
And that's in a way, think of a child's relationship with a parent as the same way you experience going to the doctor.
Mm. Oh, no, that's an interesting. Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to get what you want, are you?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Because the computer already has that figured out. Believe me, as a doctor, Dr. Google has become a really interesting fellow to share my clinic with,
Mm. Yeah, interesting.
right? Because, depending on a person's research and patience, they may or may not have the information they need,
Right.
But that's still us reaching out to try and get a managing kind of confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
when we're trying to solve our health by going online, it's 50-50. You're going to end up in a situation where someone's just trying to sell you something.
Yes, I'd say it's a higher percentage than that, but
Well, yeah, yeah. But I'm just saying, but notice that the relationship is very similar to going to your doctor's office,
mm.
because you're not looking for a sequence of things to participate in. You're looking for something you can swallow
Mm. Mm-hmm.
or buy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not trying to go too far from the point I'm trying to make, because it's sort of like a parallel to the point I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
The internet doesn't give you, unless you're actually talking to people like we are right now,
Mm-hmm.
anything else than a doctor's office experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where's the answer to that? How do you spell astrophysics?
Mm-hmm.
I need to put a this in a that to make something else happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an impatience, there's an urgency, and there's, again, we trust the internet more than people because it's faster.
Mm-hmm. And there's access to so much information, not
Yeah.
all of which is accurate, but
Well, no, but again, and this is the hardest thing for parents to get is your only talent remaining of value is you spell better, right?
well,
If you're
I
gonna if you're gonna if you're gonna do the distancing managerial version of parenting.
mm-hmm.
Whereas if a child knows that there's an experiential opportunity that's going to happen if you go for a walk together, you cook some food together, there's a with thing, and they need that instinctually, they'll reach out for that if it's available to them.
Mm,
So we have to start creating and modeling environments in which that experience is something they've had enough of
mm-hmm.
to understand it, to have opinions about it, and to realize that it feels a certain way.
Right.
So maybe after a year or two of trying different ways to physically connect, to socially connect with your kids without screens, they may eventually start asking, want to go
Mm-hmm.
for a walk? Want to go play? Want to go do something else?
Mm-hmm.
Because their instincts are guiding them. If the opportunity is there, they'll take it.
Got it.
But in a screen addicted parent versus a screen addicted child, there's no opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I can see for those of us who tend to have a managerial style, it would be good to rethink that.
Yeah, I mean, that's only good when they've done something really bad. For that first 5 minutes when they walk in the door and you're like, oh my God, the consequences. We have to manage the consequences. 5 minutes later, you're sitting on the couch crying about something really horrible that happened because you listened to them. But for that first few seconds, the instinct we have is to manage. But
Mm-hmm.
that's for like a few seconds to control the consequences of something catastrophic. It's
Mm-hmm.
not anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And we miss so much as parents. I don't know how many people I've talked to on their deathbeds that are like, I completely missed having a relationship with my kids because I did what my parents did. I tried to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea who they are. They have no idea who I am. And now I'm 92 years old and I'm dying.
Mm.
And there's no way to get that back.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? There's no way to get it back.
Well, we value control sometimes over connection.
Oh dear. I probably have to put my hand up there.
Well, but I mean, and I'm not putting that there to shame anyone. I mean,
No.
it's like a diagnostic invitation of like, if that feels true for you, the answer is connection. Obviously, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's the obvious answer for all the children too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, there's so much technical fiddly bits that these conversations usually get into. I feel like I've done a bad job because people always want the technical fun stuff. But um, at the same time, the conversations that I want to have with people on podcasts or on screens and stuff is about the instinctual harm that's being done
Right. Right.
and the instinctual 1950s parenting thing that some of us are still carrying that never worked.
Mm-hmm.
So we can sort of, you know, have a better relationship with both of those conditions in the same way.
Right.
We can't just blame screens and blame the internet.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at the physiological situation that's going on, the instinctual situation going on, the social situation that's going on, the existential situation that's going on, and care for those things through collaboration and connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do that, you have a really normal, well-adaptive, and connected human being. Otherwise, you have a person in existential pain
Mm-hmm.
who is going to self-soothe the rest of their lives until they meet some people who help them reorient themselves to a connected world.
Yes, and and that's up for grabs whether they will meet some people who can do that and help them with that or not. Maybe they're dysfunctional for the rest of their life.
Or maybe we can all collaborate through things like podcasts, which are on the internet,
And
to start making a conversation that we're allowed to laugh about. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of trying to managing the consequences, serious, fault, blame, let's
Mm-hmm.
start asking our 6 years old, okay, what do you want to make for supper that we can take a picture of to put on Instagram?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, this relates to God. I mean, the internet. I mean, the lateral network in which all things really important happen. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll start to get to know that person, and they'll start to get to know themselves.
Yes. Yes.
Because you can't get to know yourself as a social being looking at a screen.
No, that's true. That's true. So I think one of the things for parents is the need to be more flexible in your thinking about this and how you approach it.
Could I say a slightly different thing? Because I'm not
Sure.
disagreeing with you. I would just like to voice my experience as a parent.
Uh-huh.
As a parent, we're in a catastrophic and cataclysmic disorientation of how to socialize as a human being. We're breaking our entire civilization and culture through passivity and the belief that we can manage people instead of meet them.
Mm.
It scares me more than all the damage this virus could do if it hung around for decades,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the most serious problem we face as a civilization. Existential pain is the thing that turns people off. We're turning our entire world off.
Oh.
It's terrifying. But it's a utility, and if we choose to use it in balance with normal human, experience and behavior based on 200,000 years of humans, we're going to be okay. We just can't be impatient managers about it. We have to really sit down on the floor together and listen to young people tell us, how they think that would look,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
really begin it as a conversation. And to find ways, maybe through cartoons, to play out the example of the difference between Billy, who has a balanced screen life and a proactive screen relationship, and Billy, who has a very dysfunctional and reactive relationship with screens, and to play that out for people because people learn through modeling and storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you and I had $1 million, we could say, let's make a cartoon where these two twins are split at the age of 6 months and they meet again at 12, and they had a very different proactive or reactive relationship with screen time,
Mm-hmm.
and how they reconnect at some point and actually try and connect, as human beings, maybe a great story to unravel that construct we have in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's the thing. It's either a proactive relationship that's healthy, or it's not. And
Mm-hmm.
so many of us, it's not.
Right. Wow.
Doesn't matter if you're 6 or 60. It can be really a negative relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Michael, this has been an eye opener for me, and I hope it is for a lot of the listeners, especially those who have children, which probably most people do, but especially those who have young children and are unhappy with their home life, what they're seeing, the amount of screen time, and hopefully this can give some people a kick in the butt to think about doing things differently and trying something different.
Make it a sequence, make it a cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
I just had an image in my mind as you were saying that, thinking, because again, I think about single moms and kids because that's sort of our higher at risk population around
Mm-hmm.
mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a picture of some mom and her kid, and she's aware, oh my God, I've got to get this screen addiction handled, lying on a bed, looking at a screen together, playing a game together
Mm-hmm.
as step one of the sequence.
Right.
And then step two, maybe finding something more interactive to do, where there's sort of a taking of turns of what happens with the screen. And then maybe a sequence where instead of doing this on a screen, let's do this coloring thing on a coloring book so that we can both sit here, same place, sitting in bed, but let's color the coloring book together. To recognize you can have a very similar relationship with a two-dimensional object that's actually physically real and isn't driving your brain in five different directions at once, and it's happening with the person next to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like there's a thing we call an addiction treatment called harm reduction, where you keep doing the activity, you just keep changing the amount and the context of it until other opportunities make sense to the visceral pain you're experiencing to handle or the visceral pain you're experiencing that drives you to addictive behavior. So now you have other options,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't just tell people, oh, you got other options, eh? It's like,
Right.
what? Sure. That's 5 steps away from my brain right now. So
Mm-hmm.
you're not even talking to me, you're talking at me.
Right. Right.
So again, if we can start recognizing we have to sit beside the person, collaborate with what they're doing, change what they're doing with us so that the interaction becomes shared with the screen. You get to do your part, I get to do my part. That's why playing video games with kids is so powerful, because only one person has the control device.
Mm-hmm.
So they get to watch you play, then you watch them play.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're a part of the experience. It's triangular. And then maybe playing a game that doesn't require a screen or a controller, or in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because we have to kind of go into a dark place and rescue our kids step by step by step.
Right. Right. I would think puzzles would be a good tool too.
Whatever the sequence is we develop, as long as it actually is something that their authentic autonomy agrees with step by step,
Mm-hmm.
they're learning to trust themselves and trust you more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that needs to change for sure.
Right.
So not to keep blathering on, I just wanted to make sure people had like a tangible example in their mind.
Right. Oh no, and that's something you're really good at. So I've always felt you really excel at the examples and really helping people to understand the concepts that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing to do is come up with a really weird metaphor that works.
Well, you're good at it. And it keeps the conversation really interesting. Wow. Okay. Well, unless, I mean, we've covered a lot, unless there's something, it feels like that's a good wrap up point. This is going to be one of my longer podcast conversations, but it's also a really important one. So I think listeners will stick with it to the end.
Hope so.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks for reaching out. And I really hope this helps people with a sense of perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know it's going to help me. That's for sure. I can honestly say that
Yeah.
because I've been feeling very stuck in this area, and I can see that I have to change the way I do things, and yeah, be more helpful.
Yeah. Well, if I was to throw at anything, just change in the direction of width and
Mm-hmm.
make it an adventure and make it a sequence, and maybe make the win something that includes a screen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I can see for me, and I know a lot of other parents, the tendency has been to just push it away because you don't want the kids doing it. So, you're not gonna get involved in it at all, right? And that's well, it's obviously not working. So
Is that a proactive or reactive situation?
it's reactive. You're such a
I feel like
brat.
I feel like going boom, like as long as we can laugh about it, we're gonna be okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, you can't lose your sense of humor in all of this. It's you may for a short period of time, but you got to get it back. Otherwise, you're sunk, man. So, Michael, how can people get a hold of you, connect with you? What's the best way?
The easiest way would be to go to my website, and that's autoimmunehealthsolutions.com.
Wow, that's long.
Well, once
Auto,
you type it in once, you never have to type it in again. So,
that's true. Okay, so and this there'll be a link on the podcast website too, of course,
yeah,
as always.
yeah, yeah.
But autoimmunehealthsolutions.com,
Yep.
right? Okay.
So that's if you want to talk to me about something clinical.
Okay.
If you're a person who's interested in things like breath work, meditation, qigong, and all that, I also have an online qigong training program for people. So for those who want to like focus on a more embodied experiential approach,
Mm-hmm.
that's called Soma Dao Qigong, SOMADAOQIGONG.com.
Okay, maybe you better spell that once more, just in case.
Okay. So yeah, it's Soma Dao Qigong, SOMADAO Qigong, QIGONG.com.
Okay, great. Right.
So yeah, because I guess just given our conversation, that's the thing I would encourage people to think about is whatever we can do that's going to keep us in our bodies and in our breath and in the moment is probably a good idea. Because although I'm feeling a bit like a hypocrite because honestly, you learn most of that through a screen. So
But that's proactive, not reactive.
there you go. There you go.
Did I get that right? I'm
Yeah,
learning.
there we go. We're collaborating in a consensual way. Look at us go.
Yes, yay. Now we just have to do it with the kids.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, well, once again, thank you, Michael. I always enjoy our conversations and they're always so relevant and I think they're really in fact, one of somebody I did a recording with not too long ago had referenced listening to our conversation, one of our conversations, I don't know which one, and he was saying how much he enjoyed it and I like having you on. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that I don't know. Somehow together we will make good communications happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much once again. I really appreciate who you are.
You too.
Take care. Thank you, Dr. Michael Smith, for sharing your ideas and your experiences. Whether or not you have children living at home, this really does affect all of us. The podcast website is realjanine.com, where you can listen to or download episodes and click on links to my guest information. And as always, remember, Janine is Janean. To subscribe to Keeping It Real with Janine, go to your favorite podcast provider and check out my podcast YouTube channel with video slideshows of my conversations if you prefer YouTube. Do you know someone who would benefit from my conversation with Dr. Michael Smith? Of course you do. Please share with your family and friends. We'd all appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Take care and be well.